Have you ever watched somebody walk straight toward a cliff and somehow convince themselves it was a shortcut? Not stumble into it, not get tricked into it. Actually walk there on purpose, smiling the whole way. Because that's exactly what happened in my neighborhood, and the worst part was I knew where it was going long before anybody else did. My name is Ryan Mercer, and until all this happened, I lived a pretty quiet life in a subdivision called Willow Creek Estates, about 40 minutes outside of Lexington. It was the kind of place real estate agents love to advertise. Clean sidewalks, matching mailboxes, kids riding bikes after dinner, people waving from their driveways. From the outside, it looked perfect. But if you've lived in one of these communities, then you already know appearances can be misleading. Because every neighborhood has something underneath the surface, and ours was the Homeowners Association. More specifically, our HOA president, a woman named Diane Holloway. Diane had been running that board for almost 7 years, and somewhere along the way she stopped acting like a volunteer and started acting like a ruler. She wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed helping people. She enjoyed enforcing things. There's a difference. She could spot a trash can from 3 blocks away. She knew exactly how tall your grass was supposed to be. She once sent a warning letter to a retired teacher because his bird feeder was apparently the wrong shade of green. I wish I was joking. Most people didn't fight her because fighting Diane was exhausting. She always had another rule, another citation, another threat. Eventually people learned it was easier to surrender than argue. At least that's what everyone told themselves. I mostly stayed out of her way. I worked in commercial construction, spent a lot of time traveling, and honestly didn't care enough about HOA politics to get involved. Then one Thursday afternoon, I came home from a 3-day trip to Nashville and found a bright orange notice taped directly to my front door. You couldn't miss it if you tried. It looked like the kind of thing somebody would post on a condemned building. I pulled it down and started reading. By the second paragraph, I actually laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. According to the notice, I was the owner of an unauthorized wooden structure that violated community standards and posed a safety concern. The structure had to be removed within 30 days, or I would face fines of $700 per day. $700 per day. The structure in question was a wooden bridge sitting at the entrance of my driveway. Now here's the thing. I crossed that bridge nearly every day for 6 years. The previous owner crossed it before me. People had been using it longer than most residents had lived there. Nobody had ever questioned it. Nobody had ever mentioned it. Yet somehow Diane suddenly decided it was my responsibility to tear it down. I walked down the driveway and stared at it. 20 feet long. Heavy timber construction. Steel supports underneath. Solid as a rock. Then I noticed something strange. There was a small metal plaque attached to one of the support beams. I'd seen it before, but never paid attention. Years of weather had faded most of the lettering. Still, something about it caught my eye. I crouched down, wiped away dirt and moss, and snapped a few pictures with my phone. For some reason I couldn't explain, my gut told me not to ignore it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the violation notice while an old memory kept poking at the back of my mind. It wasn't clear at first, just fragments from closing documents when I bought the house. Property lines, easements, surveys, legal language nobody remembers until they absolutely have to. Around midnight, it finally clicked. The next morning, I drove straight to the county records office. If you've never spent hours digging through property maps and dusty public records, trust me, it's about as exciting as watching paint dry. But after nearly 2 hours, I found something that made me sit up in my chair. Then I found something even bigger. According to the official survey, the bridge wasn't on my property. Not even close. It sat beyond my boundary line on a narrow strip of land designated as a public access easement running alongside a creek. Then came the document that changed everything. A county infrastructure record from 1978 authorizing construction of a vehicle bridge at that exact location. Funded by the county. Maintained by the county. Owned by the county. I just sat there staring at the paperwork. Suddenly, this wasn't an HOA dispute anymore. Diane wasn't threatening to remove my bridge. She was threatening to destroy county property. And that's when I found myself facing a decision I never expected to make. I could walk into the HOA office, hand over the documents, and stop the whole thing before it started. Or I could do absolutely nothing and see how far Diane was willing to take a mistake she never bothered to verify. Sitting in my truck outside the records office, Looking at those documents in my lap, I realized something that changed the entire situation. Diane wasn't in danger because of me. Diane was in danger because of Diane. And for the first time since I moved into Willow Creek Estates, I decided I wasn't going to rescue her from her own choices. So I did nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing. No emails, no corrections, no polite little explanation saying, "Hey Diane, you might want to double check your facts." I just went back to my normal life like the whole thing was background noise, because something about the way she operated told me this wasn't going to end with one conversation anyway. People like Diane don't step back when they're wrong. They lean harder into being wrong until reality forces them to stop. And I had seen that pattern before in other situations, just not this extreme. About 3 days later, my phone rang while I was on a job site. Unknown number. I already knew who it was before I answered. Her voice came through sharp, controlled, the kind of calm that isn't actually calm, it's rehearsed. She introduced herself like I didn't already know, then immediately went into it. She said the violation was serious, non-negotiable, and that I had already been given more than enough time to comply. I remember standing there with dust on my boots, looking at steel beams going up on a half-finished commercial frame, listening to her talk about demolishing a bridge that she didn't even understand. So I asked her one simple question. Do you have any official survey or county documentation confirming that structure is part of HOA property? There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough that I could hear the shift. Then she said something that told me everything I needed to know. She said it doesn't matter where it sits. It's at the entrance of your property. Therefore, it's your responsibility. That word therefore stuck with me because it wasn't legal. It wasn't factual. It was just confidence pretending to be authority. I told her again, calmly, that I would need official documentation. She didn't like that. Her tone tightened. She said if I refused to comply, the HOA would proceed with enforcement, and I would be billed for removal. Then she hung up. No discussion, no verification, just authority walking away from a question it couldn't answer. After that call, I started documenting everything. Every voicemail, every email, every notice she had already sent. I wasn't even thinking about a lawsuit at that point. I was just building a record because something in my gut told me this was going to escalate fast. A few days later, I got a certified letter. Thick envelope, HOA letterhead, formal language, the kind of document designed to intimidate people into compliance without them reading too closely. Inside was the same claim, but this time there was something new. A form requiring me to acknowledge ownership of the bridge and accept responsibility for all repair or demolition costs. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about the bridge at all. It was about getting me to sign away the argument. If I signed it, I legally confirmed their assumption. If I didn't, they would treat it as refusal and escalate. Either way, they were trying to force reality into their version of the story. I didn't sign it. I didn't respond. I just put it in the same folder with everything else. And that's when things started moving faster. The tone from the HOA shifted from warnings to deadlines. Final notice, compliance required, contractor will be assigned. It was almost impressive how quickly they turned certainty into action without ever checking if their certainty was correct. Meanwhile, I installed 2 cameras pointed directly at the bridge. Not because I thought it would stop anything, but because I wanted every second of what came next recorded. And then came the HOA board meeting. That was the first time I actually saw Diane in her element. She stood at the front of that small community hall like she owned the room, clipboard in hand, voice steady, completely convinced she was the one holding the truth. She presented it like a case already won. Unsafe structure, repeated non-compliance, liability risk to the neighborhood. She never once mentioned checking property lines, because in her mind that step was already unnecessary. Then one of the newer board members, a woman named Claire, hesitated and asked a simple question. Should we verify the county records just to confirm ownership before proceeding with demolition? And I swear that question changed the entire energy in the room for half a second. It was like reality tried to enter the conversation. But Diane shut it down immediately. She said the location is obvious. The homeowner has been notified multiple times, and delaying further would only increase risk. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Confidence filled in for evidence. And just like that, the board voted. For in favor, one hesitant, but it didn't matter. Approved. Demolition authorized. I remember sitting in the back of that room, realizing something very specific. It wasn't that I was being ignored. It was that nobody in that room had any reason to believe they needed to double-check anything at all. And once that decision was made, everything else followed like it was already written. Over the next few days, the neighborhood started to shift. Diane posted updates on the community board without naming me directly, but everyone knew who it was about. She called it a dangerous non-compliant structure being removed in the interest of safety. People started commenting, agreeing, praising the HOA for protecting property values. I stopped getting eye contact from neighbors when I walked my dog. That part was almost surreal. How quickly perception can flip when authority labels something for you. Then, 3 days before demolition, I saw the trucks. Flatbed hauling, an excavator rolled past my house like it was just another maintenance job. That was the moment it stopped being paperwork in a folder and became something physical. Metal weight movement. Real consequences getting delivered to my driveway. And Diane, she was right there with them, standing in the same spot I had stood weeks earlier looking at that bridge, except now she was looking at it like it was already gone. That night, I sat on my porch for a long time, just listening to the quiet, thinking about how something so stable could be treated like it was invisible. And I realized the next morning was going to change everything, one way or another, and I wasn't sure yet which version of that outcome the neighborhood was actually ready to see. The morning of the demolition started like any other morning that you know is not going to stay normal for long. The sky was clear in that almost suspicious way, no wind, no noise, just this heavy stillness hanging over Willow Creek estates like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath without realizing it. I was already outside before the trucks arrived, sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee I barely touched, watching my driveway like it was a stage someone was about to step onto. And then they came. First the flatbeds, then the utility trucks, then the excavator sitting there like a sleeping animal waiting to wake up. And right behind them, Diane Holloway. She stepped out of her car like she was arriving at an inspection site, not the beginning of a destruction order. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, calm posture, everything about her said confidence, like this was just another box she was about to check off. The workers moved fast, setting cones, unloading equipment, marking boundaries they never actually verified. Nobody questioned anything because nobody had been trained to question her. She walked to my driveway and stopped a few feet away from me. This was the first time we had actually stood in the same space without paperwork between us. She looked at me for a second and said, "Last chance to avoid unnecessary costs. We can still pause this if you agree to take responsibility." Her voice wasn't angry. It was almost polite, which somehow made it worse. I looked at her, then at the bridge behind her, then back at her, and said, "I'm not interfering with anything." That was it. No argument, no warning, just a quiet refusal to participate. I remember seeing something flicker across her face, not doubt exactly, more like satisfaction, like she took my silence as confirmation she was right all along. She nodded once, turned around, and walked back toward the crew. And that was the moment everything crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. At exactly 8:17 in the morning, the excavator started. The first contact with the bridge was almost gentle in a way that made it worse, like it didn't understand what it was about to destroy. Then the pressure came down, and the wood cracked open like it had been waiting years to give up. I stood there watching something I had crossed 1,000 times break apart in seconds. Planks snapping, bolts tearing, steel groaning under force. It was never designed to resist in that direction. The creek underneath caught the debris like it had been waiting for it too. Diane stood a few feet away taking pictures. Actual photos. Smiling slightly. I remember thinking how strange it is that people can document something they don't fully understand while it's happening right in front of them. And then I saw it. The small metal plaque I had noticed weeks earlier. It was still attached to a broken section of beam, now lying sideways in the dirt. From where she stood, it was probably just scrap. From where I stood, it was the exact detail I had been waiting for. By the time the demolition ended, there was nothing left that even resembled a bridge. Just scattered timber, broken supports, and mud where something permanent used to exist. The crew started packing up like it was routine. Diane walked back up to me again, this time smiling like the job was complete. She said the HOA would be issuing an invoice for removal costs, $14,200, and if I failed to pay, they would place a lien on the property. She said it like she was explaining the weather. Then she left. No hesitation, no second thought. just drove away like the outcome had already been finalized in her mind. I waited until the last truck disappeared before I even moved. Then I went inside, closed the door, and sat down at my table. And that was when I made 3 phone calls. The first was to the county engineering office. I reported the destruction of county infrastructure located on recorded easement land. The second was to the sheriff's department, giving them the timeline, the contractor name, and the HOA involvement. The third was to the county records division, sending every document I had collected from day one. Within hours, things stopped being quiet. Inspectors were dispatched. Case files were opened. Emails started moving between departments faster than I could track. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't the one holding the fragile position. 2 days later, my phone rang again. It was Diane, but this time her voice wasn't controlled. There was no confidence in it, no authority, just something closer to confusion trying to hold itself together. She asked me what I told the county. I told her I reported the destruction of public infrastructure. There was a long silence on the line. Then she said, "That bridge was on your property. You never told us otherwise." And that was the moment everything finally came into focus. I said, "You never asked." And I could hear it, the shift happening in real time, the realization that the foundation she had been standing on wasn't just weak, it was never there at all. She tried to speak again, but the words didn't land the same way anymore. Because once facts enter the room, confidence stops working as a substitute. The investigation moved quickly after that. County records confirmed ownership. The easement was verified. The demolition was flagged as unauthorized destruction of public property. Liability didn't just fall on the HOA, it reached every decision that led to it. And Diane, the person who had built her entire authority on certainty, suddenly found herself answering questions she couldn't redirect anymore. People always asked me what I felt at that point. If I was angry, or satisfied, or vindicated. The honest answer is it was quieter than all of that, because it didn't feel like victory. It felt like watching a system run long enough to reveal exactly where it breaks. Not because I pushed it, but because nobody checked it before they trusted it. And that's the part that stuck with me the most. Not the destruction, not the conflict, but how easy it was for everyone involved to believe something without verifying it. The neighborhood eventually moved on, as neighborhoods always do. People stopped talking about it, stopped asking questions, started acting like it was just another story that happened once and doesn't matter anymore. But I still think about that bridge sometimes. Not because it was special, but because it wasn't. It was just a piece of infrastructure that became a problem the moment someone assumed instead of confirmed. And if there's anything I learned from all of this, it's that assumptions don't just create mistakes. They create consequences that don't care how confident you were when you made them. So yeah, that's where it ended. Not with applause, not with a clean resolution, but with a quiet realization that sometimes the most dangerous thing in any system isn't malice. It's certainty without verification. Now I want to ask you something, honestly. If you were in my place, would you have stopped it early, or would you have let it play out the same way I did? And more importantly, do you think Diane ever actually believed she was wrong, or do you think she just ran out of room to be right? I read the comments, so I'm curious where you stand on it.